Danger is the possibility of suffering harm, loss, or pain. It is a concept or feeling that can generate insecurity, dread, or fear. In a narrative, it is one of the most powerful weapons to create engagement with the viewers because the greater the strength of this feeling, the greater the public's investment in a solution for it. For example, I can present you a film about a terrible monster that relentlessly pursues our protagonists, terrifying not only them, but even the spectators who accompany the plot, generating genuine reactions in the audience that extend beyond the work itself. But since we are not here to talk about Alien, then the obvious question within this context becomes how, in a movie as colorful and cute as Kung Fu Panda, can we present with real weight the notion that there is a serious threat coming to our heroes and that it shouldn't be taken as a joke. Behold Tai Lung. In this movie, there are two scenes dedicated to introducing the villain, and the way in which both are performed is the key to understand the mastery present in the introduction of this antagonist's force. The first scene is the presentation of the prison where the villain is being held, and the second is the escape from said prison demonstrating his skills. It's a simple case of preparation and reward. Initially, we get to know all the characters involved in this mini plot while we present most, but not all, obstacles that must be overcome if the antagonist really wants to escape. The first scene begins with the messenger Goose arriving at the prison and being met with disrespect given the Rhino Chief's outrage. His establishment's capabilities have just been questioned and Master Shifu's recommendation is to double the forces. We have here one of the big important questions for the beginning of the film. Is this prison really adequate enough to contain Tai Lung? We then spend the next few minutes trying to answer that question while also knowing the stage for the future action that will unfold. One entrance, one exit. 1,000 guards and one prisoner, says the super confident chief about his forces only to have them questioned by the goose in the form of an answer. Yeah, but this prisoner is Tai Lung. And here we establish the dynamic between these two characters as being a great back and forth, a kind of attempt to balance the weight of the scene. On the one hand, the script says, look, this is a massive and very powerful prison. And on the other hand, it also reinforces the other side saying, but wait, the prisoner can be even more terrifying. It is also interesting to know the meaning of clarifying the idea of one entrance and one exit, at the same time as the verticality of the place is presented. That way, the villain's escape path is very obvious, creating expectation in the audience in the form of anticipation. We then have the continuation of the back and forth as we see our good guys going down to the lower level. Again, great vertical distance from the exit, as well as a giant crossbows aimed at the prisoner. This is one more point for the prison. But we see Tai Lung trapped with a huge turtle shell and chains tied to huge rocks stretching his arms. Even in the face of all this strength and all these defenses, there he remains quiet, cold, and unwielding. That's a point for the villain. And the last direct confrontation between the opposing forces of this environment appears when the chief provokes him, stepping on his tail and receiving no reaction from him at all. The guy doesn't even flinch, only sketching a reaction once the goose feather falls in front of him. With that, the first scene is complete, the scenario established, the anticipation has been created. And man, I have to admit, I usually even feel sorry for inescapable super prisons within narratives. Because in general, their purpose on the story is actually to be escaped. The more effed up the prison, the more I want to see how the prisoner will escape and overcome its forces, and here is no different. The characterization here is also very well done. On the antagonist side, we have the threat of pain and brutality embodied in Tai Lung. He doesn't need anything other than his silence and visuals to make us understand that this shit is serious. As for the good side, on the other hand, we have an intelligent separation between two poles, which there's one recognizing the size of the villain's danger and one that arrogantly mocks such. Not to mention that as we are talking about characters, in addition to introducing Tai Lung, this scene also works very well with the unusual development of the prison's rhino boss. Through him, we will go on a whole character arc, subtly placed in the story that maybe has even more work put on than other characters who have more screen time in this movie. The Rhino Chief lives a lie, believing that his prison is enough to resist the villain, and that he and his guards are more than enough to deal with the threat they guard. He thinks that he doesn't need help and he doesn't recognize his weaknesses. That's why the two prison scenes not only serve as an introduction to the villain and his escape, but also as a challenge for the growth of this character introduced here. Will the Rhino be able to recognize his weaknesses and own up to his need for help against a force greater than his own in time? Or will the head of such a stronghold remain so sunk in his arrogance that he will choose to test his strength against such a powerful Kung Fu master? Knowing that the conclusion of these scenes is Tai Lung's escape, then we have the goose and its skepticism as the voice of reason. He is the only one who recognizes the size of the threat and doesn't bow to the fact that the villain must be taken very seriously, more so than he already is. The goose, Tai Lung, and the chief. Two of them believing in the truth that it is the prison's weakness in the face of its dangerous prisoner, and the other believing in the lie that will be tested in the next scene. After all, can the antagonist escape the prison? Let's see. After all the setup done in the scene, the only moment we see the villain's reaction is the appearance of the feather. His face covered in darkness, leaving only the opening of his eyes to show his feelings of hatred. In the next scene then, Tai Lung begins his escape. The moment he breaks his shell is the catalyst for his mini escape arc. The reaction of the protagonists and the entire prison is an invitation for the viewer to feel the same, and the way the scene progresses only adds to the mysticism behind this ferocious beast. For right away he breaks his chains, one of them with brute force even, and by doing so, having the goose declares an intention to escape, only to be immediately stopped by the chief. He plans to face Tai Lung head on, and so we have our declaration of war. Will the Rhino pay a heavy price for not evacuating immediately? Here, it is as if we enter the second act of the scene. The first being the establishment of the beginning of his escape. Now the development can begin. Tai Lung uses the giant arrow shot at him as his own to escape, uses the platform to defend himself against more projectiles, and uses even one of the guards' club against several of them. If you pay close attention, everything that is used against the villain, he uses it back against the good guys. They shot giant arrows at him and he uses them as a way to break chains, as weapons, and even as thrusters. If a barrage of arrows threatens his safety, then he uses the very platform they have as a shield. And further on we know that once he's facing the exit door, when bombs are used to knock over rubble that should throw him down the well, Tai Lung once again takes the enemy's weapons and throws it at all the guards, eliminating all of his foes. It's an interesting way to create a unique threat style for this character and generate even more the sense of seriousness. The guy is a real danger. Nothing used against him works. And even worse, what is used against him returns as a problem. The villain's climb out of the prison is geographically very symbolic as well. It is, metaphorically, the exit of a demon directly from hell, escaping from his hostile, dark and biochromatic environment to the vivid world of vibrant colors of our Panda protagonist. Then, finally, they face each other. Tai Lung, the boss, and the goose. So far, the good guy still refuses to accept the truth, holding on to the belief of being right and being able to deal with the threat thanks to his bombs and giant rocks. When I talk about his arrogance, this is exactly the thing I'm referring to. For if from the beginning it was an option for him to bury Tai Lung with the prison, then this was perhaps the wisest act from the beginning. Not to mention that no one could be sure that Tai Lung would let the goose escape just to give the message to Master Shifu. So the prison chief literally risked leaving every village in Tai Lung's path unprotected and unaware of the coming danger, all because of his ego and arrogance. The stones are then exploded, and here one of the most important moments of this whole sequence occurs, which is Tai Lung falls. That's right, the antagonist who was so far perfect in his escape suddenly has a significant momentary defeat. This is fantastic because it humanizes the villain and makes him more realistic. It's very easy to write a super badass antagonist and unbeatable in every way. But it is much more painful when we get a glimpse of the possibility of defeating him early on, just to have that taste ripped from our mouths due to his incredible ingenuity and adaptability. So, even when he finds himself in trouble, he turns his situation around, captivating the viewer with his perseverance and even so reminding us, wait, I can root for him, he's the bad guy. And as a reward for all of the incredible action we've witnessed, there's still the final moment of the Rhino character finally concluding his arc, unfortunately for him, too late. The goose, very correct from the beginning, now looking at the bombs falling in their heads, asks if they can leave now, and the Rhino Chief, with his defeat assumed and written all over his face, can only answer, yes. It's refreshing to see how in two small scenes a whole character is built and undergoes a major emotional shift in a convincing way. If you look closely, each of these two scenes can be divided in 3 acts, and all with the clear purpose of building a worthy villain to the plot. One is the descent into hell and the other the escape. In the first scene, the entrance to the prison and how isolated it is, plus the boss' frustration at the ladder, serves as the first act. We know the characters, their dynamics, and are therefore somewhat familiar with the geography and climate of the prison. The first half of the second act has fun and games. What is the prison like? What are its strengths, the faces of the guards who protect it, etc. Not to mention getting to know more about the Goose's fears and the Chief's arrogance. This moment is all about discovery and light exploration, stalking even more public interest. Not to mention that this is where we see the terror of this place that, again, is on the side of the good guys. So if this whole thing is to contain the villain, how sinister must he be? Question answer in the second half of the second act, Arrival at Tai Lung. The climate changes drastically, becoming even more dangerous and hostile. The goose's fear of something going wrong now grows exponentially as the chief turns his verbal taunts into physical abuse against his prisoner. The bomb is about to go off and the supposed good guy laughs about it. Third act in conclusion, the goose pretends to be convinced, thus recognizing the strength of the rhino just so that both of them can leave at once. Things seems to be fine and about to be resolved, only for, in a final twist, we have the revelation of the feather falling right in front of Tai Lung and him picking it up for his escape and beginning of the next scene. And since we've mentioned it, let's see its sequences. First act, we have the introduction of the problem and the positioning of our characters in the situation. Tai Lung is free and the chief decides to force everyone to stay and fight. The first part of the second act shows how Tai Lung adapts and overcomes obstacles to climb further and further into the prison. It is a moment of plot development in a lighter way where the weight of the narrative is not so serious and the difficulties are not yet at their peak. Already in the second part of the second act, we start with our midpoint, where the protagonist achieves the significant goal of reaching the top, but now he must face an even more serious danger. Having, at this point, his opponents using full force, Tai Lung wins his final challenge by finishing the act with a big explosion. And finally, the third and final act of conclusion, with Tai Lung, after acting like a rabid beast, being calm and methodical when talking to the little terrified goose. The structure of these scenes and how they are put together is what gives a progressive sense of preparation and reward. Even if in the second one, Tai Lung can be considered the protagonist, it is always necessary to remember that he is the villain of the main story and his every victory is a growing threat to the real protagonist. Kung Fu Panda, in general, is an excellent film with many good scenes and these two are certainly not left out of it. The birth of a good villain comes through a solid construction supported by actions and consequences of characters who made choices in the face of difficult situations that were put on them. Shifu chose to disturb the order of the prison by sending a messenger, which in turns was in part the cause of the whole thing, while upon his arrival it was the chief's choice to refuse to take even stronger precautionary measures, given the fact that Shifu was right, as all it took was a mere feather and Tai Lung escaped. Not to mention that this device comes to the villain thanks to an act of intimidation by the Rhino when he wanted to pull a prank on the poor messenger. In the end, the same fear that he made the bird feels is what he feels in the face of an enemy for him unbeatable. Quite poetic. And let's not forget that all these moments weren't the first form of introduction to the antagonist, since we first heard about him from Shifu and Oogway, where in those cases Shifu, terrified, mentions how Tai Lung is a great danger and reacts with great concern to the possibility of his escape. But let's be clear, this by itself is a very weak construction of threat. Having the characters in your work talk about how badass or scary or amazing a character is within the work itself is equivalent to having a mother trying to convince other people how beautiful and wonderful her favorite little boy is. Fortunately, Kung Fu Panda recognizes this and doesn't rely on these self-praises comments to provide us with good characters. And as a final touch and icing on the cake to conclude this mini prison arc, Tai Lung lets the goose escape on purpose, just to show even more the danger he carries by abandoning the element of surprise altogether and declaring open war on Shifu and his new dragon warrior. Do you want to tell everyone that I escaped? Go on then. That is exactly what I want. When it comes to being the Dragon Warrior, I already consider myself the legitimate holder of that title. What the villain does here is almost like a Hitchcock bomb inside the narrative itself. The best way to build suspense is to let people know the danger is approaching. Absolutely awesome. This guy spent the whole escape kicking the asses of everyone in the prison, getting rid of any and all obstacles like a cold and calculating hungry beast. And only after everything was done and actions had said all that needed to be said is that he really reveals his personality through quiet dialogue and smooth tonality. Excellent villain intro, strong hook for the rest of the film, and on top of that, fantastic visual representation for a goodbye to the scene. With Tai Lung's shadow covering the entire peaceful and colorful valley he plans to attack. So that is it, my friends. Now you all know. Next time you need to make someone terrified of you, you just gotta learn Kung Fu, beat up some of his colleagues, let one of them run away to send a message to the rest, and that's it. Problem solved. Now if that's not your case and your problem is actually being a billionaire who doesn't win the sympathy of others around you, then I suggest watching my latest video about Tony Stark's that's right here on the screen. Alright, sounds good? Thank you very much for your attention and until next time.